February 20th, 1943. Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands. The screaming started at dawn. 800 Japanese soldiers charging through dense jungle undergrowth in a final desperate Banzai assault. Sergeant Robert Sullivan gripped his standard-issue M1 Garand, watching the enemy close the distance. 50 yards, 40, 30. The rifle that dominated European battlefield suddenly felt useless in his hands. Too slow to reload, too narrow in its deadly reach. Every Marine knew the terrifying mathematics. A Banzai charge moved at 10 miles per hour, and once they broke through your line, survival became a matter of luck, not skill. But Sullivan wasn't holding his Garand that morning. Strapped across his back was a weapon the Marine Corps had nearly discarded. A World War I trench gun that military experts called hopelessly outdated for modern warfare. The 12-gauge pump-action shotgun hadn't seen serious combat since the trenches of France 25 years earlier. As the Japanese soldiers burst through the final line of vegetation, Sullivan raised the forgotten relic of the Great War. What happened next would force the Marine Corps to completely rewrite their jungle warfare doctrine. Sullivan had carried doubts about the trench gun since the moment it was thrust into his hands 3 weeks earlier. The weapon felt foreign after months of relying on the M1 Garand's precision and range. Lieutenant Colonel Reynolds had made the decision to distribute the shotguns after reviewing casualty reports from previous Banzai encounters. But Sullivan wasn't alone in his skepticism. The pump-action mechanism seemed clunky compared to the smooth operation of their rifles, and the limited ammunition capacity, only 5 shells compared to the Garand's 8-round clip, felt like a step backward in firepower. The morning of February 20th began like countless others on Guadalcanal. Sullivan's squad had established a defensive perimeter along a ridge overlooking a narrow valley choked with mahogany trees and thick undergrowth. The humidity hung like a wet blanket, and the familiar sounds of the jungle, chattering birds, rustling leaves, distant artillery created a backdrop of false normalcy. Private Carter sat nearby, methodically cleaning his assigned trench gun with the same meticulous attention he gave his rifle. The 19-year-old from Ohio had adapted to the shotgun faster than most, but even he questioned whether 5 shells would be enough when the Japanese came. The first indication of trouble arrived as it always did, with silence. The birds stopped singing. The insects fell quiet. Sullivan had learned to read these signs during his 8 months in the Pacific, and he immediately signaled his men to prepare for contact. Corporal Matthews positioned 20 yards to the left, raised his hand in acknowledgement, and chambered around in his trench gun. The metallic sound of the pump action seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden stillness. Through his binoculars, Sullivan spotted movement in the tree 400 yards down the slope. Individual figures emerged from the shadows. Japanese soldiers moving with the disciplined precision that preceded every Banzai charge. He counted them. 50, then 70, then over 100. The enemy formation spread across a front of nearly 200 yards, far wider than any charge his squad had faced before. Each soldier carried the traditional Arisaka rifle with fixed bayonet, and their synchronized movement suggested this would be one of the coordinated assaults that had broken American lines throughout the Solomon Islands campaign. Sullivan's radio crackled with reports from adjacent positions. Similar formations were assembling along the entire ridge line, a coordinated attack involving at least 800 Japanese soldiers. The numbers alone made his stomach tighten. His 12-man squad would face approximately 60 charging enemies, odds that would have been manageable with proper fields of fire and adequate ammunition. But the dense jungle vegetation limited visibility to less than 50 yards in most directions, and the trench guns carried only 25 rounds per man compared to the 80 rounds typically issued for M1 rifles. The charge began with the traditional battle cry that had terrified American forces since Pearl Harbor. 800 voices screaming in unison created a sound that seemed to shake the ground itself. Sullivan watched through his field glasses as the Japanese formation surged forward, moving at the practice pace that brought them within effective range in less than 2 minutes. The enemy soldiers ran in loose formations, weaving between trees and using the terrain to mask their approach. Their training showed they maintained spacing to prevent concentrated fire from breaking their momentum, and they moved with the desperate energy of men who expected to die. Carter called out the range estimates as the charge closed distance. 300 yards and closing fast, Sergeant. The private's voice carried steady professionalism despite his age, a testament to the rapid maturation that combat demanded. Sullivan could see individual faces now, young men not much older than Carter, their expressions twisted with the fanatical determination that made Banzai charges so effective against unprepared defenders. These weren't desperate last stands. They were calculated tactical decisions designed to exploit American weaknesses in close combat. At 200 yards, Sullivan gave the order to prepare for engagement. His men shifted positions behind fallen logs and natural depressions, each Marine checking his weapon one final time. The trench guns felt inadequate compared to the approaching tide of bayonets and screaming voices. Sullivan had seen Banzai charges before, and he knew the critical moment would come when the enemy reached the 50-yard mark. That was the distance where rifle accuracy became irrelevant, and survival depended on rapid, devastating firepower. Matthews had positioned himself at a natural choke point where the terrain funneled the attacking force into a corridor less than 30 yards wide. The veteran corporal understood the tactical advantage this position offered, but he also knew that concentrated enemy fire would find him quickly once the shooting started. His trench gun held 5 shells loaded with 9 pellets each, 45 projectiles that would spread in a cone roughly 10 feet wide at close range. The mathematics of engagement suddenly felt more favorable than they had with his rifle. The charge reached 100 yards, and Sullivan could hear individual voices among the collective screaming. Japanese soldiers stumbled over roots and crashed through underbrush, but their forward momentum never wavered. Some carried satchel charges designed to destroy American positions, while others wielded traditional swords alongside their rifles. The psychological impact was immediate and intended. Several of Sullivan's newer Marines showed visible signs of panic, their hands shaking as they gripped unfamiliar shotguns. At 75 yards, the enemy formation began to concentrate as the jungle terrain forced them into predictable avenues of approach. Sullivan realized that the dense vegetation that had seemed like such a disadvantage was actually working in his favor. The Japanese soldiers could only advance along certain paths, creating natural kill zones that his trench guns could dominate. He adjusted his positioning orders, directing Carter and 2 other Marines to cover the main approach while Matthews held the secondary route. The final 50 yards passed in seconds. Sullivan raised his trench gun and flicked off the safety, feeling the unfamiliar weight distribution compared to his rifle. The weapon that had seemed so primitive in training was about to face its ultimate test against an enemy tactic that had broken American defenses across the Pacific. Everything he had learned about conventional warfare was about to prove inadequate, and his survival would depend entirely on a forgotten relic from the trenches of France. The first shot shattered Sullivan's preconceptions about modern warfare. As the lead Japanese soldier burst through the undergrowth at 40 yards, Sullivan squeezed the trigger of his trench gun. The 12-gauge shell launched 9 lead pellets in a spreading pattern that caught not just his intended target, but 2 soldiers running alongside. All 3 men dropped instantly, their charge broken by a weapon Sullivan had dismissed as obsolete just moments before. The pump-action mechanism cycled smoothly despite the humidity, chambering a fresh shell faster than he could have reloaded his M1 Garand. Carter opened fire from his position near the main trail, and the sound was unlike anything the Marines had experienced in previous engagements. The sharp crack of rifle fire was replaced by the thunderous boom of shotguns, each discharge echoing through the jungle like artillery. The psychological effect on the charging Japanese soldiers was immediate and devastating. Men who had trained to absorb rifle casualties found themselves facing a wall of scattered projectiles that made individual accuracy irrelevant. Carter's second shot caught 4 soldiers in a cluster, the pellet spreading across a cone nearly 15 feet wide at 30-yard range. The jungle environment that had frustrated American forces throughout the Pacific campaign suddenly became their greatest tactical advantage. Dense vegetation that blocked rifle bullets at long range proved no obstacle to shotgun pellets at close quarters. Mahogany branches that deflected aimed shots merely scattered the spreading patterns of buckshot, creating ricochet effects that struck Japanese soldiers from unexpected angles. Sullivan watched in amazement as his third shot penetrated through a screen of leaves and vines that would have stopped his rifle round completely, striking two enemies he could barely see through the foliage. Matthews had positioned himself at the secondary approach, where the terrain created a natural funnel. His first engagement came when 6 Japanese soldiers rounded a cluster of fallen trees at 25 yards. The veteran corporal fired twice in rapid succession, his pump-action shotgun cycling with practiced precision. 12 shells had been loaded with double buckshot, each pellet roughly the diameter of a .38 caliber bullet. At close range, the effect was catastrophic. The narrow confines of the jungle trail concentrated his fire pattern, and all 6 attackers fell within seconds. The speed of engagement fundamentally changed the nature of combat. Sullivan's previous battles had involved careful aim, breath control, and precise trigger squeeze at ranges exceeding 100 yards. The trench gun eliminated those requirements entirely. At distances under 50 yards, pointing became more important than aiming, and rapid fire mattered more than accuracy. His fourth shot was fired instinctively at a muzzle flash glimpse through dense undergrowth. The spreading pellets found their target despite vegetation that would have made rifle fire impossible. Lieutenant Colonel Reynolds had insisted on distributing 25 shells per man, a decision that seemed wasteful during the initial briefings. Sullivan now understood the tactical reasoning. Each shotgun shell contained multiple projectiles, effectively multiplying the firepower of every Marine. His 5-round magazine capacity translated to 45 individual projectiles, comparable to an entire 8-round rifle clip. The additional ammunition allowed sustained engagement without the careful conservation required for rifle cartridges. Carter discovered another advantage during his 6th shot. A Japanese soldier had taken cover behind a tree trunk that would have provided complete protection from rifle fire. The spreading pattern of buckshot curved around the obstacle, striking the enemy from angles that direct fire could never achieve. The 19-year-old private began using this technique deliberately, firing at angles that sent pellets ricocheting through the jungle canopy to strike targets in seemingly impossible positions. The humidity that had plagued American equipment throughout the Solomon Islands campaign affected the trench guns differently than expected. While rifle barrels required constant cleaning to maintain accuracy, the shotgun's effectiveness actually improved in the dense, moisture-laden air. The atmospheric conditions that scattered rifle bullets at long range had minimal impact on buckshot patterns at close quarters. Sullivan found his weapon functioning more reliably than his M1 Garand had during similar conditions on previous patrols. Corporal Matthews had trained extensively with the pump-action mechanism during the 3 weeks since receiving his weapon. His muscle memory now allowed him to cycle shells without conscious thought, maintaining continuous fire while moving between positions. The veteran Marine had calculated that his sustained rate of fire approached 3 rounds per minute, significantly faster than bolt-action rifles and competitive with semi-automatic weapons. More importantly, each round delivered devastating effect at the close ranges where jungle combat occurred. The sound signature of the shotguns created confusion among Japanese forces accustomed to the distinctive reports of American rifles. Sullivan could hear shouted commands in the enemy formation, but the order seemed disjointed and uncertain. The attacking soldiers had trained extensively to recognize and respond to M1 Garand fire using the distinctive 8-round clip ejection to time their advances. The continuous boom of shotguns disrupted their tactical timing and eliminated the audio cues that coordinated their assault. By his 10th shot, Sullivan realized that the weapon he had reluctantly accepted was revolutionizing close-quarters combat. The trench gun's effectiveness in jungle conditions exceeded every prediction made by Marine Corps analysts. Dense vegetation that limited rifle engagement ranges to under 50 yards created perfect conditions for shotgun employment. The weapon that seemed primitive compared to modern rifles was actually ideally suited for the environment where American forces fought their most desperate battles. Carter had expended 15 rounds and discovered that reloading under combat conditions required different techniques than rifle ammunition. Shotgun shells were larger and more awkward to handle, but the process was simpler than managing 8-round clips. The private developed a rhythm of firing 3 shots, topping off 2 shells, and continuing engagement. This technique maintained continuous firepower while ensuring his weapon never ran completely empty during critical moments. The Banzai charge that had seemed so overwhelming at 400 yards was fragmenting under the concentrated shotgun fire. Individual Japanese soldiers continued advancing with fanatical determination, but their coordinated formation had dissolved into scattered groups struggling through increasingly deadly terrain. Sullivan's squad had discovered that conventional wisdom about infantry weapons was wrong. In the dense jungles of the Pacific, the outdated trench gun had become the most effective tool for stopping enemy assaults, transforming desperate last stands into controlled defensive victories. The aftermath of the February 20th engagement provided Lieutenant Colonel Reynolds with data that challenged every assumption about infantry weapons' effectiveness in jungle warfare. Sullivan's after-action report documented 23 confirmed enemy casualties from a 12-man squad armed with trench guns compared to average Banzai charge results of 4 to 6 casualties per squad using standard rifles. The engagement duration had lasted 3 minutes and 40 seconds from first contact to enemy withdrawal, significantly shorter than the 8 to 12-minute firefights typical of rifle-based defenses. Most remarkably, the Marine casualties totaled 0 dead and 2 lightly wounded, a reversal of the casualty ratios that had plagued American forces throughout the Solomon Islands campaign. Reynolds immediately recognized the tactical implications of these numbers. Standard Marine doctrine called for rifle fire to commence at maximum effective range, typically 200 to 300 yards, in open terrain. Jungle conditions reduced this to 50 yards or less, creating engagement windows of 15 to 20 seconds before enemy forces reached American positions. The M1 Garand's 8-round capacity allowed experienced Marines to fire 6 to 7 aimed shots during this critical period, assuming perfect conditions and no mechanical failures. Sullivan's squad had demonstrated the trench guns could deliver 20 to 25 effective shots per man during the same time frame, with each shot producing multiple projectile impacts. The operational analysis extended beyond simple firepower calculations. Reynolds' staff reviewed ammunition consumption data from previous engagements, discovering that rifle-equipped squads typically expended 60 to 80 rounds per confirmed enemy casualty during Banzai charge encounters. Sullivan's squad had achieved a ratio of 12 shotgun shells per casualty, with each shell containing 9 pellets. The effective ammunition total-get ratio showed dramatic improvement, particularly significant given the logistical challenges of resupplying forward positions in dense jungle terrain. Corporal Matthews provided crucial insights into the weapon's performance under combat stress. His experience with both rifles and shotguns during the same engagement allowed direct comparison of ergonomic factors. The pump-action mechanism proved more intuitive under extreme pressure than bolt manipulation or clip changes. Matthews reported that his muscle memory adapted to the shotgun's operation within the first 10 rounds, while rifle proficiency had required months of training to achieve similar reliability. The weapon's operation remained consistent despite the adrenaline surge and fine motor skill degradation that accompanied close combat. Medical reports from the engagement revealed additional advantages of shotgun employment. Japanese soldiers wounded by rifle fire typically remained capable of continued attack for several seconds after being struck, often long enough to reach American positions with bayonets or satchel charges. Shotgun casualties showed immediate incapacitation in 93% of documented cases. Navy corpsmen attributed this to the multiple trauma channels created by scattered pellets, which disrupted nervous system function more effectively than single bullet wounds. Carter's detailed account of reloading procedures under fire provided tactical data that influenced subsequent training protocols. The private had successfully reloaded his weapon 7 times during the engagement, maintaining continuous fire by staggering his ammunition changes with adjacent Marines. His technique of loading 2 shells after every 3rd shot prevented the weapon from running completely empty while ensuring maximum sustained firepower. This approach proved superior to the traditional practice of emptying the weapon before reloading, particularly when facing human wave attacks that provided no natural pause in combat. The psychological impact of shotgun fire emerged as an unexpected force multiplier during post-engagement interrogation of captured Japanese soldiers. Prisoners reported that the distinctive sound of pump-action cycling created panic within their formation, as the weapon was associated with American police and gangster films that had circulated in Japan before the war. The thunderous report of 12-gauge shells at close range produced auditory shock effects that disrupted communication and coordination within attacking formations. Several prisoners described the experience as encountering thunder guns that seemed to fire continuously without reloading. Reynolds's analysis of terrain factors revealed why the trench gun proved so effective in Pacific conditions. The dense vegetation that characterized most engagement areas created natural funnels that concentrated attacking forces into predictable corridors. Shotgun patterns, which spread to approximately 10 feet in diameter at 30 yards, perfectly matched these terrain-imposed kill zones. The weapon's effectiveness actually increased in jungle conditions, contrary to conventional wisdom that favored rifle accuracy and range. Jungle warfare had unknowingly created the perfect environment for shotgun employment, despite the weapons designed for trench combat 25 years earlier. The maintenance requirements of trench guns under tropical conditions surprised both Marines and their equipment specialists. While rifle barrels required daily cleaning to maintain accuracy, shotgun performance remained consistent despite accumulated fouling. The larger bore diameter and lower pressures generated by 12-gauge ammunition proved more tolerant of humidity, mud, and debris that plagued smaller caliber weapons. Carter reported that his weapon functioned reliably throughout the engagement despite being dropped in muddy water during the initial positioning phase. Supply chain implications of widespread trench gun adoption presented both challenges and opportunities. 12-gauge ammunition was significantly heavier than rifle cartridges, reducing the number of rounds each Marine could carry. However, the improved effectiveness per round partially offset this disadvantage. Reynolds calculated that a Marine carrying 25 shotgun shells possessed equivalent firepower to a rifleman with 40 to 50 rounds, while weighing approximately the same total ammunition load. The reduced ammunition requirements also simplified logistics for units operating far from established supply lines. Training protocols required fundamental revision to incorporate shotgun tactics into Marine doctrine. Traditional marksmanship emphasized precision, breath control, and single-shot accuracy at extended ranges. Shotgun employment demanded rapid target acquisition, instinctive pointing, and sustained rate of fire at close quarters. Matthews volunteered to develop training programs that could prepare Marines for this tactical shift within the abbreviated time frames available between combat operations. Intelligence reports from captured documents revealed that Japanese commanders had begun adapting their Banzai charge tactics to counter American rifle fire. Enemy formations had learned to exploit the 8-round capacity limitation of M1 rifles, timing their final rushes to coincide with reloading cycles. The continuous fire capability of pump-action shotguns eliminated this tactical advantage, forcing Japanese forces to develop entirely new approaches to close assault operations. By March 1st, Reynolds had compiled sufficient data to recommend immediate expansion of trench gun distribution throughout the 1st Marine Division. His report to higher headquarters included detailed ammunition consumption analyses, casualty ratio improvements, and tactical employment recommendations. The weapon that military planners had considered obsolete for modern warfare had proven itself the most effective tool for stopping enemy charges under jungle conditions, fundamentally altering the tactical balance in favor of defending American forces. The monsoon rains that began on March 15th exposed the first serious weakness in the trench gun's jungle performance. Sullivan discovered this during a routine patrol when his weapon failed to eject a spent shell, leaving him temporarily defenseless. While Japanese snipers targeted his position, the pump-action mechanism that had functioned flawlessly during the February engagement now struggled against the constant moisture that penetrated every seal and crevice. Within 48 hours of continuous rainfall, half the shotguns in his squad were experiencing intermittent malfunctions that threatened to negate their tactical advantage. Carter found himself troubleshooting mechanical failures that had never appeared during training exercises. The steel components of the pump mechanism began showing signs of corrosion despite regular cleaning, and the wooden stocks started swelling from moisture absorption. His weapon jammed twice during a night ambush on March 18th, forcing him to transition to his backup sidearm while enemy forces advanced within grenade range. The reliability that had made the trench gun so effective was proving vulnerable to environmental conditions that exceeded the weapon's original design parameters. Corporal Matthews initiated field modifications that violated standard Marine Corps maintenance procedures, but proved necessary for operational survival. Working with limited tools and spare parts scavenged from damaged weapons, he began disassembling shotguns to identify the specific components most affected by humidity. The extractor mechanism showed the greatest susceptibility to malfunction, followed by the trigger group assembly and the magazine tube spring. Matthews discovered that excessive lubrication actually worsened the problem by attracting debris and sand that clogged moving parts. The technical challenges extended beyond mechanical reliability to ammunition performance. Shotgun shells stored in tropical conditions began showing signs of degradation within 2 weeks of the monsoon's onset. The cardboard holes absorbed moisture despite wax coating, causing inconsistent chamber pressure and erratic pellet patterns. Sullivan's squad experienced 3 catastrophic shell failures during a single engagement, with one round producing a muffled report and pellets that barely reached 15 yards. These ammunition failures occurred at exactly the moment when reliable firepower was most critical for survival. Lieutenant Colonel Reynolds faced a tactical dilemma that threatened to undermine the entire trench gun program. Field reports from multiple units documented similar reliability problems, with malfunction rates climbing to 23% during extended operations in wet conditions. The weapon that had revolutionized close-quarters combat was proving unreliable precisely when Marines needed it most. Reynolds's staff calculated that mechanical failures during enemy contact had already resulted in 4 Marine casualties that might have been prevented with functioning weapons. The improvised solutions developed by experienced Marines like Matthews began spreading through informal networks that bypassed official channels. Techniques for waterproofing pump mechanisms involved materials never intended for military use, including beeswax obtained from local sources and petroleum products diverted from vehicle maintenance supplies. These field expedients improved reliability, but created new problems with weapon standardization and maintenance procedures. Each squad developed slightly different approaches to keeping their shotguns operational, making centralized training and supply support increasingly difficult. Sullivan's attempts to maintain his weapon according to official procedures proved inadequate for jungle conditions. The standard cleaning kit designed for rifle maintenance lacked tools appropriate for shotgun mechanisms, and the prescribed lubricants attracted moisture rather than repelling it. His weapon required complete disassembly and cleaning after every patrol, a time-consuming process that left Marines vulnerable during periods when they should have been resting or preparing for upcoming operations. The maintenance burden was becoming a significant tactical liability. Carter developed a rotation system that kept at least half his squad's weapons functional at any given time. Marines would alternate between 2 shotguns, allowing one weapon to dry while the other remained in service. This approach required doubling the number of weapons carried by each unit, creating logistical challenges for patrols operating far from established bases. The additional weight burden reduced ammunition capacity and mobility, partially offsetting the tactical advantages that had made trench guns so effective during initial engagements. The psychological impact of weapon malfunctions proved as significant as the mechanical problems themselves. Marines who had grown confident in their shotgun stopping power now faced the possibility of equipment failure during critical moments. Sullivan observed increased stress levels among his squad members who began carrying additional backup weapons despite the added weight. The reliability issues were undermining the morale benefits that had accompanied the trench gun's initial success against Banzai charges. Ammunition supply problems compounded the mechanical difficulties facing shotgun-equipped units. The specialized nature of 12 gauge military ammunition meant that resupply operations required different logistics procedures than standard rifle cartridges. When shipments were delayed or damaged by weather, Marines found themselves rationing shells while enemy activity continued at normal levels. Sullivan's squad operated with reduced ammunition loads for 6 days during late March, forcing them to restrict engagement ranges and avoid patrols that might result in prolonged firefights. Matthews's unofficial role as the unit's technical expert expanded as other squads sought solutions to similar problems. The veteran corporal found himself conducting informal training sessions on field maintenance techniques, sharing knowledge that had never been codified in official manuals. His expertise became so valuable that Lieutenant Colonel Reynolds began consulting him directly on equipment decisions, bypassing normal channels to access practical knowledge gained through combat experience. The environmental challenges facing trench guns highlighted broader issues with equipment adaptation for Pacific theater operations. Weapons designed for European conditions required extensive modification to function reliably in tropical climates. The humidity, temperature extremes, and corrosive salt air created problems that had not been anticipated during PCM development and testing. Sullivan's experience represented a microcosm of the adaptation challenges facing all American forces operating in unfamiliar environments. By the end of March, field reports indicated that properly maintained trench guns retained significant tactical advantages despite their reliability problems. Units that successfully adapted their maintenance procedures continued achieving superior results against Japanese charges compared to rifle-equipped forces. However, the weapon's effectiveness now depended heavily on the technical competence of individual Marines rather than standardized procedures that could be applied universally. This created disparities in performance between different units based on the experience and ingenuity of their personnel. The crisis forced Marine Corps leadership to choose between abandoning a tactically superior weapon system or accepting the operational complications required to maintain it under combat conditions. Sullivan's squad had demonstrated that trench guns could remain effective if properly supported, but this required resources and expertise that were not universally available. The balance between battlefield effectiveness and logistical sustainability would determine whether the forgotten weapon of the Great War would continue serving American forces in the Pacific. The black volcanic sand of Ioima presented challenges that transformed the trench gun from a jungle warfare specialist into an urban combat weapon. Sullivan's boots crunched across the gritty surface as his squad advanced toward the honeycomb of Japanese bunkers that dominated the island's interior. The dense vegetation that had defined Pacific combat for 2 years was replaced by an alien landscape of sulfur springs, rocky outcroppings, and concrete fortifications that seemed to emerge directly from the earth itself. The tactical advantages that had made shotguns so effective in jungle encounters would require complete reappraisal in this new environment. The first indication of changed conditions came during the landing on February 19, 1945. Carter struggled to keep his weapon clean as volcanic ash infiltrated every mechanism despite protective covers. The fine particles proved more destructive than jungle humidity, grinding between moving parts and creating an abrasive paste when mixed with lubricants. His first attempt to cycle the pump action after reaching the beach produced a grinding sound that indicated potential damage to the extractor mechanism. The weapon that had survived months of tropical conditions was being defeated by an environment no Marine had trained for. Lieutenant Colonel Reynolds's reconnaissance of Japanese defensive positions revealed why trench guns might prove even more valuable on Ioima than they had in jungle warfare. The enemy had abandoned Banzai charge tactics in favor of fortified positions that channeled American attacks through narrow corridors barely wide enough for single-file movement. These underground passages and reinforced bunkers created engagement ranges of 5 to 15 yards, distances where shotgun effectiveness would be maximized. The weapon designed for trench warfare in France was about to face conditions remarkably similar to its original intended purpose. Corporal Matthews led the first underground assault on March 2nd when his squad was tasked with clearing a tunnel complex that housed approximately 30 Japanese defenders. The concrete passages measured 6 feet in height and 4 feet in width, dimensions that made rifle maneuvering extremely difficult while favoring the compact profile of pump-action shotguns. Matthews carried 40 rounds of double-lot buckshot specifically selected for close-quarters penetration, each shell loaded with 12 pellets capable of defeating light armor at point-blank range. The confined spaces amplified every aspect of shotgun employment, both positive and negative. The thunderous report of 12-gauge shells and concrete tunnels created acoustic shock effects that stunned enemy defenders and disrupted their coordination. Matthews observed that Japanese soldiers often became disoriented after the first shotgun blast, providing critical seconds for American forces to advance. However, the same acoustic effects proved nearly unbearable for attacking Marines, requiring modifications to standard assault procedures to prevent hearing damage among friendly forces. Sullivan discovered that bunker clearing operations demanded different ammunition selection than jungle encounters. Standard buckshot loads proved inadequate against reinforced concrete and steel plate barriers that Japanese engineers had incorporated into their defensive positions. His squad began employing specialized breaching rounds loaded with hardened steel projectiles designed to penetrate fortified materials. These shells reduced the effective pellet count from 9 to 6 per round, but provided the penetration necessary to engage enemies behind substantial cover. The psychological warfare aspects of shotgun employment proved particularly effective in underground combat. Japanese defenders trapped in bunkers had no escape routes when American forces blocked tunnel entrances with concentrated fire. Carter reported that enemy resistance often collapsed after the first few shotgun rounds as defenders realized the futility of fighting in confined spaces against weapons that made individual marksmanship irrelevant. The claustrophobic environment that favored Japanese defensive tactics was transformed into a killing ground where American firepower dominated. Ammunition consumption rates during bunker operations exceeded all previous projections. Sullivan's squad expended an average of 60 rounds per cleared position compared to 25 rounds per engagement during jungle operations. The increased consumption reflected both the intensity of close-quarters fighting and the need to maintain continuous suppressive fire while advancing through interconnected tunnel systems. Supply lines that had struggled to maintain adequate shotgun ammunition in jungle conditions faced even greater challenges supporting bunker clearing operations. Matthews developed specialized tactics for navigating Japanese tunnel networks that incorporated lessons learned from both jungle warfare and urban combat principles. His approach emphasized rapid movement between firing positions using shotgun patterns to clear multiple directions simultaneously. The veteran corporal discovered that ricocheting pellets in concrete passages often struck enemies who believed they had adequate cover, creating lethal effects that exceeded the weapon's design capabilities. The medical challenges of treating shotgun wounds in underground environments complicated evacuation procedures and required modifications to standard casualty care protocols. Navy corpsmen reported that blast effects in confined spaces created injuries unlike those seen in open terrain, with acoustic trauma becoming as significant as projectile wounds. The weapons that had proven so effective at stopping enemy attacks were also creating treatment challenges that strained medical resources. Carter's experience clearing fortified positions revealed the importance of coordination between different weapon systems. While shotguns dominated close-quarters encounters, they proved inadequate for suppressing enemy positions at longer ranges or penetrating heavily reinforced barriers. His squad developed combined arms techniques that employed rifles for precision fire and shotguns for final assault phases, maximizing the advantages of each weapon system while compensating for their individual limitations. The volcanic environment created maintenance challenges that differed significantly from jungle conditions, but proved equally demanding. Sulfur compounds in the air corroded metal components at accelerated rates, while volcanic ash acted as an abrasive that wore down moving parts. Sullivan's weapon required complete cleaning after every operation, with replacement parts becoming critical supply items that demanded priority allocation from rear echelon units. Intelligence reports indicated that Japanese commanders had begun adapting their tunnel defense tactics specifically to counter American shotgun employment. Enemy forces started using longer passages that exceeded effective shotgun range and incorporating barriers designed to fragment pellet patterns. These adaptations forced American assault teams to develop counter-tactics that restored their advantages in underground combat. By March 15th, casualty reports demonstrated that shotgun-equipped units suffered significantly lower losses during bunker-clearing operations compared to rifle-armed forces. Sullivan's squad had participated in 14 separate tunnel assaults with 0 fatalities and 3 minor wounded, statistics that contrasted sharply with the heavy casualties typically associated with fortified position attacks. The weapon that had revolutionized jungle warfare was proving equally transformative in the urban combat environment of Ioma. The success of trench guns and bunker operations led to increased demand that exceeded available supply allocations. Lieutenant Colonel Reynolds found himself rationing weapons among competing units, each claiming operational priority for their specific missions. The forgotten relic of World War I had become one of the most sought-after weapons in the Pacific theater. Its effectiveness proven across multiple combat environments that its designers had never envisioned.